Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime, and welcome back to Super Ultra Mega Math History, Phenomenal Figures. The series where I talk about different people throughout math history that had an impact on math or the world, usually both, and I talk about them in a respectful way when it makes sense, and an over-the-top way when it also makes sense. And I'm gonna do it pretty chill. So let's get into it. Today we're gonna do this on Évariste, Galois. And if we have anybody who speaks French, if I butchered that, let me know. But anyway, so when it comes to Galois, this was an interesting dude. He was a mathematician that he made interesting contributions, and then he did other things that led to interesting contributions down the line. So he has, I feel like, a decent legacy, but also a decent legend. And before we even get into it, it's like it's hard to talk about this without opening up with the legend. Dude died at 20 in a duel. Like, he was shot to death. Like, that's crazy. And so I want to get into it because we have here a guy who was a mathematician, but he was also a political activist. And that led to some things. So let's get into it. So with Galois, he got into math in a serious way during his teenage years. He was mostly taught by his mom in the beginning steps of his life. His father was into politics, and that shapes things. And both were a big influence in his life. So throughout his teenage years and until he died, he actually did a lot of math. A lot of it centered around algebra. And in terms of his legend, there's a lot that you could say about it, some of which is not definitive. But one of the things that you can definitively say is that his theory, Galois theory, allows us and shows us that you can take an algebraic equation and you can find a radical solution. So you can say that a radical solution can solve that problem. And sorry, that was redundant. But the whole big thing is that that's actually pretty interesting because today we don't think of it as a big deal. We know that we can have like a solution that would be like a root. So like a square root or a cube root, etc. And we're like, hey, that's okay, that's not an issue. But it was back then. So his theory allows us to say that it's possible, that it shows that. And I think that's pretty cool. And he also did a lot with group theory, and one of the interesting things in his life is that he had such groundbreaking ideas, but he wasn't always good at expressing it, or expressing them. And one of the cool things is like he got to talk to a lot of different mathematicians of that era, which is 1800s France. There's too many to list here, but I'm gonna have some things posted in the description, so if you want to know more about that, you can. But it's kind of crazy how many people he knew in the short time that he was here. So the dude was undeniably talented, but he wasn't always great at proving some of the groundbreaking ideas that he had, and that's fascinating. But I started this with saying that he has a legend surrounding him, and yeah, that's a thing that I think we could talk about. So he did a lot of math. But while he was doing all this math, he was also a political activist. And France in that early 1800s in general, it was kind of crazy. There was a lot of political uprisings and things of that nature, and he was definitely involved. Eventually, this led to an arrest, and he got cleared of his charges. It came from a banquet with the king at the time, where his words were threatening, or at the very least they could be perceived that way. And but yeah, so he got out of that. But a few days later, if I'm not mistaken, he ends up going through the streets dressed in a uniform, protesting, and it was a uniform of a branch of the military that was problematic because of revolutions. And by the way, he was definitely heavily armed, and I would like to think that played a role in it, but it seems to be about the uniform. But yeah, either way, he ended up in jail for a second time, in which case he tried alcohol for the first time, got pretty plastered, and wrote a letter, which, interesting enough, kind of foreshadowed his death in a way, because he saw himself dying to protect the honor of some like woman. Like, he wasn't specific, he just thought that that's how he would go. And this is where it gets interesting to me. So eventually, things started ramping up, and he was challenged to a duel, and it's like, okay, or yeah. So they had the whole duel thing go, and he started doing more math, and how much math he was doing is up for debate, and some people say it's exaggerated, but the whole thing was like he started putting together some of his stuff, and tried to be more coherent, following the advice of people like Hoshi. And yeah, so he puts his stuff together more. He goes out there and he duels. And I don't know if it was one person, I don't know if it was multiple people. And to this day, history does not fully know. But he had challenged someone to a duel, or he was challenged to a duel, and he got shot and died. His brother was there when he died, and he told his brother not to cry because he needed all the courage he could muster to die at 20. So it's kind of crazy. But yeah. So I mean, that's such a downer way to end it. So I'll try to like mix that up a little bit. So the whole thing was, Galois was a dude who had a crazy amount of potential. He knew a lot of mathematicians at the time who acknowledged his talent, but indicated to him that he needed to step up his explanations. He needed to prove things better. And though he was furious about that at different points in his life, he did in fact adjust. He did listen to them, and so he did contribute a lot to algebra that helped, both indirectly and directly. And I think that's pretty cool. And the kind of potential that he had is just like, I feel like it's nice to kind of see someone well known throughout history that known for their mathematical abilities but struggled to get ideas across, because you don't see that. We often think that people are just like flawlessly stating this or flawlessly stating that. The stuff was clear in his head, but he didn't always put it out on paper, and I think that's interesting. That's part of his tale. And of course, in addition to his legacy of math, you have his legend, and to this day it's not fully clear what actually prompted the duel and who was actually involved. But the biggest theory is that he liked a girl, and he was defending her honor. And there are some things out there to support that, but it's not conclusive. So that's one of the biggest ones, and I think the biggest. But there's some people throughout history where it still can't be fully proven that everything was kind of like staged for political reasons. So those are the two theories, with the former being the biggest one, but no one fully knows for sure. So it's like fascinating. But all we do know is he was a mathematician. He died really young in a duel of a gunshot wound, and he contributed some things to math, both directly and indirectly. And so he has quite the legacy, quite the legend. And yeah, that's about all I have to say about Galois. So I'll see you in the next one. Professor Prime out.